how to assess whether or not it's going well or not, whether or not to move on or stay put with that therapist and so on. You've been telling us a lot about the structure of the self. Unconscious mind, conscious mind, defense mechanisms, character structure, self. We haven't talked so much about the function of self. I realize it's been woven in here or there.
Yes.
Could you tell us about the function of self? Are the functions of self verb actions? I mean, are these things that we are all doing right now that reflect our character structure? Are these things that we can change more readily than trying to snap our fingers and say, okay, I'm now going to be a more altruistic person? Because I can decide that right now, but then ultimately I have to engage in some altruistic behaviors to lend support to that. Again, staying with the parallel that I can't just snap my fingers and say lower blood pressure. You know, I have to do some meditative practices, some cardiovascular training and things of that sort. What is this function of self thing? What goes into the functions of self?
Okay, so just stepping back to the framing, right? So there are these two pillars upon which we build our lives: the structure of self and the function of self. And we've been talking, as you said, more about the structure, which is more the nouns of it. Like there is an unconscious. What is in that unconscious? For example, there are defense mechanisms. How are we using them? Like it's not all nouns, but it's more what are those things? And then we start talking about how we put them into practice. The function of self is much more the verbs, right? So if the structure is more nouns, the function is more the verbs, right? The actual engagement, right? So that would start with an awareness of I. So a function of self has to start with an awareness that like there's a person, there is a me that is separate from others, right? And I have responsibility for this I, right? Like it is me, no one else is guiding it, like it's me. I know there's a me, okay? Then on top of that, we start seeing defense mechanisms in action, right? Because we're thinking about function, right? We're aware that there's an I, but the first thing that starts happening to that I are unconscious things, right? So the defense mechanisms, because we're not choosing them, right, they start doing things automatically. So if, for example, I have a defense of avoidance, right, then I'm not thinking, you know, if it's, I'd like to meet a new person, but I automatically am shying away, right? Then it's not good, right? It's a factor, right? But it's a factor I'm not aware of until I start this process of introspecting, right? So the defense mechanisms are then kind of determining the lay of the land, right?
So in that example, I'm sorry to interrupt, but but in that example, the turning away you describe as reflexive. So you're talking about someone perhaps who would like to have a romantic partner or meet somebody, have a companion, and they go to the grocery store and somebody says something as they're reaching for the milk, and you know there's that moment of opportunity where they could say something back, but instead they just kind of go, "Oh yeah, thanks," and then they kind of move away, and then the narrative in their head might be, "Oh gosh, that was silly," but they don't really think about the alternate possibility,
or there might be no narrative.
But they head off to the produce section.
Yeah, and then they go home and someone says, "Oh, did anything happen at the grocery? You mean you went to the grocery store?" No, right?
Because it's all unconscious.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Now again, can we explore that and change that? Yes. Right. But it's important to understand that whatever that nest of defense mechanisms is, like that's what I've got right now, right? And I'm living through that right now, right? It's performing a function. Right? Just because it's an unconscious function doesn't mean it's not a very, very important function.
I can see in that example how it protects the conscious mind from risk, because there's always the possibility of rejection. There's a possibility of overinterpretation of what the other person is talking to them for, right? Like, is the person interested in them, or whether or not this is just, you know, friendly banter of the sort that anyone would have next to anybody, that it's not special to them. So I can see how the unconscious turning away is protective against all the negative possibilities. And in some sense is pretty rational, because the probability that one interaction could ratchet up to a life of companionship and romance with somebody is exceedingly small, really.
Although you could imagine a set of data points where you string together, you know, like 5-second clips, you know, all like the time something like that has happened, right? So maybe this is a person that, intermittently, like people are interested in them or saying, hey, or saying hello or showing interest. You could string all those together and the person hasn't noticed one of them, right? And then could have a very negative, see, no one wants me, no one's interested in me, or whatever the person is saying. But like, it's different if you see from the outside, like it's objectively different, but that person doesn't know. And that's why after being an awareness, there is an I, the next thing that I think of in the function of self is the defense mechanisms in action.
What are some other examples of defense mechanisms in action? Because I think there's immense interest in this. The idea that we have unconscious processes in us that are reaching up out of the iceberg and preventing us from seeing our life and ourselves the way that it actually is occurring, and perhaps preventing us from achieving these ideals of agency and gratitude, empowerment and humility. These seem like very powerful and important forces. And I know many other people out there want to understand whether or not what we're doing and what we're feeling and experiencing, whether or not that is serving us well or not.
So I think the place to start is to say that there's something very, very complicated going on, right? The part of the iceberg underneath the surface, right? That biological supercomputer that's running at 1 million thoughts and 1 million actions and 1 million internal processes a second, right? Is constantly shifting our defensive structure. So it's complicated, and you can almost imagine that like one leaves and another comes in and they're shifting and there's a little bit of one and some of another. So it's a very complicated process, but we can look at it and understand. So an example of a defense mechanism that's very common and can cause us a lot of problems is projection, right? So I'll give two examples of projection. So one is the experience of sitting in a car, right, and being stuck in traffic, being a little bit late, right, and feeling beleaguered, right? I mean, this has happened to me more times than I can count, but at some point I started through my own therapy looking at like, what's going on in me, right, when I'm doing this, right? So think about the feeling beleaguered, right, as if, what does that mean? Like there's something called traffic that exists and has a mind and wants to thwart me, right? Is it individual cars? Is it the people in the cars, right? What's going on is I'm having a perception of hostility. I feel beleaguered, right? But it's anger and frustration inside of me, right? I'm the one feeling angry and frustrated. There's no one and nothing but me that's feeling anything about this, right? But I have this sense of the world around me being hostile because I'm projecting my anger outward, right? Now, I think this isn't good because instead of sitting in traffic and saying, look, maybe it totally makes sense that I'm stuck in traffic and that I'm not happy. Like maybe I should leave a little bit earlier and I wouldn't be late. Or if I'm going to work, should I live closer to work? Like I could make a whole set of decisions that I'm not making, right? Or maybe I thought it was going to be a 15-minute drive and like there was an accident, right? And okay, there are things that I can't control. I'm not supposed to control everything, right? If you think about what can I control, being aware of that, and what can I not control, right? Then it can make the situation much better so this doesn't happen with this frequency. And it also takes away the anger and the frustration, right? So I think that's a good example because it happens a lot. It's very, very common. But projection then also happens with people, right? So let's say you and I work together and we're going to do something collaborative together, and I'm just not having a good day and something negative happened before I came to work, and I'm not at my best and I'm a little bit irritable and frustrated, right? This happens all the time where then the person sits down with someone and then I'm being irritable and frustrated, which doesn't feel good to you, right? And you may become irritable and frustrated, right? And then I say, oh, look, he's irritable and frustrated, right? But even if you don't, the fact that I feel that way, right? That projection often would lead me to think that it's you who's that way. Here I come wanting to do this job and you're not at your best. It's me who's not at my best, right? But we do this all the time, and then we make incorrect or inaccurate attributions, right? So projection is an example of a defense mechanism that can cause us a lot of trouble, right? A lot of trouble. Another can be displacement, where if I'm feeling anger or frustration, say, in a certain realm, then the idea of feeling it at work and then kicking the dog, right? Like it's not good that we do that. We're not acknowledging what's going on inside of us at work, what we could change, what we could make better. And the dog doesn't want to be kicked, right? And the dog is often, also the family, right? And it could be physical or it could be through words, right? But the idea that with that there's something negative being generated in us, but inside we're perceiving that it's coming from somewhere else, right? I mean, the thought would be it's all things to lead us astray, right? When they're negative defenses, right? There can be positive defenses too, such as altruism, right? That someone could do something negative to me, right? And instead of me passing that along, I could decide, no, I'm going to do something nice for the next person I have an opportunity to do something nice for, right? Like that's a defense. And sometimes we could think of it and decide that way, but there are people who react that way. Like there's something negative that happens and they respond with something that's different from that. So defense mechanisms can work against us. They can work for us. They're complicated. There are combinations of them, but we can look inside and say, for example, if I'm using projection all the time, right? And I think everyone around me is kind of always angry and frustrated, right? And there's always bad traffic, right? But then as we start to talk about it more, it becomes apparent that there's a lot I'm angry about, right? But I'm not aware of it. Then reflection or therapy, right? Or a good friend we're talking to can help us see, right? That, hey, this is going on inside of me, right? And that can really help us. Same with use of humor. Like if I'm using humor and I'm kind of decompressing uncomfortable situations or things that make me feel uncomfortable, maybe that greases the wheels of social progress. But maybe over time, I come to use humor in a way that's self-denigrating, right? Well, that's not so good anymore, but I may not be aware of the shift just because I can maybe be funny in certain situations that I'm now not using that for myself anymore. I'm using it against myself. And by talking to people, by reflection, like we can be aware of the defensive structure that's going on inside of us. And then there's not an automaticity to it. If you point out that I'm using projection a lot, I can start to be aware of that. Just like if someone, let's say you were with me at the grocery store, right? And someone says something nice and I shy away and you say, hey, you weren't even aware someone said hello to you. And then I said, I want to be more aware of that. Like I don't want that thing to happen unconsciously. So maybe now I think, okay, anytime someone I don't know says something to me, I'm going to just stop and think like, what's going on here, right? Is that person being friendly to me? Are they just, it's just a person exchanging money at the cash register? Like what's going on? So we take what's unconscious and we make it conscious so that we can change it.
Sounds to me like exploring and thinking about our reflexes is what's really key here. The example of displacement that you gave, kicking the dog, I couldn't help but smile, not because I think it's a good thing to do. I never once kicked my dog, by the way, folks. Terrible thing to do. Also, he was the size of a boulder. It would have injured me more than it would have injured him, but I never would do such a thing. However, in academia, there's this phenomenon that's very common that I refer to as trickle-down anxiety, where the person running the laboratory is inevitably under a tremendous amount of stress, grants and papers, et cetera. And graduate students and postdocs will immediately be familiar with what I'm describing. But for those of you that haven't gone to graduate school, this will be a little bit foreign, but you'll think of other examples where when the lab head is under stress, it's incredibly common for lab heads to walk through the laboratory and start asking about experiments and telling people to do additional experiments and basically just assigning busy work to people or pressuring what simply cannot be moved along any faster. And when I was a graduate student, I worked for somebody who was the exact opposite of this phenotype. When I was a postdoc, frankly, I worked with someone who was a little bit of that phenotype, although I still liked working for him very much. But I used to have a response that, at least for me, was adaptive, which was I would always say, I'm working as fast as I carefully can, because no scientist ever wants somebody to cut corners, no good scientist anyway. But trickle-down anxiety is common in every occupation, I think. We see this sort of displacement all the time, where someone's anxious and so they go start creating anxiety for other people. I mean, you can just, as you're describing, I was just seeing how pathologic that is for everybody involved.
So the academic, the trickle-down anxiety that you were just talking about it's a related, but it's a different defense mechanism, and it's projective identification, right? Which is causing others to feel the way that you feel in order to get your needs met, right?
Is this a form of projection? And actually, perhaps you could clarify the definition of projection versus displacement versus projective identification?
Yeah, so projection is when you don't own it. So it's not me who's mad, it's you, right? So I don't own that I'm mad at all, right? I just think that it's you, even though I'm the one who's mad, right? Displacement is what comes out of us, or our attribution can shift, right? It's not this person who's making me angry, it's that person, because that's a safer person, right, to be angry at, right? Or if I'm then going to take out my anger, right, instead of metaphorically kicking the person who might respond to me in a way I don't want, maybe I kick the dog that's helpless to respond back, right? So that's displacement. Projective identification is there's an expression of an emotional state inside of a person that then becomes contagious to other people, even though the person isn't trying to do that. If the person says, I'm going to make you anxious, that's not a defense mechanism anymore, right? So here's an example, I think this is the best example of projective identification. So for a little bit of time at work, I would occasionally lose my keys, right? So then I'm trying to go and I can't find my keys, right? So I say, oh, I don't know where my keys are, right? So I start expressing something, right? And I'm anxious and I'm tense, right? Now people around me hear that, right? And what do they start feeling? They start feeling anxious and tense the way that I do, right? And now they're like, well, now they want to find my keys, right? They want to help me so that I stop spreading anxiety and tension into the whole environment around me, right? So then they help me find my keys. I say, thank you. My own emotional state comes down. And upon reflection, I think, look, I don't want to do that, right? I'm getting my needs met by making other people feel in a way that's like not a good or comfortable way to feel. So here's a way around that, like put my keys in the same place every day, right? So then I can avoid that because it doesn't feel good to me. Like then if I get out to my car, like I find, I'm breathing a little heavy. Like it doesn't feel good because I was just agitated, right? And I did that to other people too, right? So it's an example of how projective identification works, and it's kind of a simple example, but it shows it's happening all the time. All these things are happening all the time, but we can become aware of it. Then I don't lose my keys. I don't have to feel bad about it. I don't have to activate myself for no reason, and I don't have to activate other people for no reason. So sort of thinking and reflecting, like change that thing for the better, and it can do it with much bigger things too.
Thank you for those clarifications.